I'm here with Trent and Jared. Jared, could you go ahead and start by telling us a little bit about your story and what's happened?
Well, I'm a fourth generation farmer rancher here in South Dakota. Be kind of 15, 20 miles southwest of Aberdeen, that's the bigger town by us. We raise cattle and then corn, soybeans, millet, and alfalfa. This has been in my family since 1907 here, and keep raising the fifth generation, so they're coming up. I got a 17-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old boy, and hopefully plan is for them to hopefully take the ranch over someday and expand this a little bit, and where we can expand is kind of the cow-wise of this thing. We got to go to the north of the farm. We got a bunch of trees and stuff planted up there, and that is right where this pipeline wants to come in, right in the middle of the corridor, come through and totally disrupt all our future plans. And I have been fighting this the whole time since the beginning of it. And the more you learn about carbon pipelines and what's actually happened here, the worse this whole project gets for the public and everybody. There's absolutely zero public use for this stuff. So I've been very adamant to be at the county commission meetings and help with ordinances and in multiple counties. And then that's how I met Trent along the way. He's been kind of covering the story also. Well, more than kind of, he's been a huge help for getting our word out there. And been some other things kind of happen along the way with some surveyors and stuff too. They came here the one day I was planting, and they showed up. My wife happened to be home. She's recovering from surgery, and they showed up here, and in fact, they came in the house and yelled, and then they went across the road to the shop and went in the shop. Well, the shop is in a totally different parcel of land. It's not on anything under the judge's order for them to survey. And we didn't know who it was. It was just an unmarked pickup with Louisiana plates on it. So when they went up to the field, I had my wife go up there. And when she got up there, she called me. And when I picked up, I heard them say Summit Surveyors. And my words were, if it's Summit there to survey, the sheriff should be involved. I'll deal with this later. Because I was planting and coming to a water hole. I had to get off the phone and turn around. And that's all I said. Well, a few hours later, the detective came out here because they went to the sheriff and said that I threatened to kill him. So I got to go to court for all that stuff, for contempt of court. And when we were in court, had a lawyer, we had witnesses. There was probably 50 other landowners there. And the judge never let us go over any of the evidence that we had or any of the stuff. He just said he's not going to find me in contempt. And if I wanted to clear my name up, he could do it on social media. Well, then a few weeks go by, they came back to the farm, and it was a little different type of survey stuff. They brought drill rig in here, and they drove right through my feedlot, which 4 gates they had to open, went out across the new trees, and drove right into the crop, and drilled down 90 feet on each side of the slough. And I don't know if that was just a message sender to what it was, but all it has done is sparked more interest in this pipeline and made I refer to us as the pipeline family. We just keep growing and getting stronger all the time, and that really brought more people into this fight, and just showing how they're walking all over private property owners and things like that.
How do they have a right to your land?
Well, we went to court because I didn't want to let them on the survey, and that's how all of the south part of Brown County here is that way. So we went to court, and the judge ruled that Summit could go on and do it. It just seems like any of the upper officials just agree with Summit and this huge foreign-owned corporation to come in here and take our land. And they go right at the farm sites around here. I know through here it's probably 8 miles, and they're by like 12 different farmhouses. That's within like 1,000 feet of them or less. There's some all the way up to 100 feet from their house is where they are with this. And I know up in McPherson County, I got a great friend up there, and there's 9 miles, and they go by 14 homes. And McPherson County is not a very populated county. Like, it's tough to just see the neighbor around there. but they manage to go like they're aiming for the people in the country to get us out of here the way it looks to me, and control of food. Seems like if you got cows around your place, they made sure they went by that. And it's just it's a very frustrating deal to be put in. Didn't think this could even happen in America, and it's happening in full effect right now. And it all boils back to that 45 tax queue. As long as that money's hanging out there, it's just like a prime rib hanging in the tree, and the wolves are going to keep coming.
It shouldn't be that easy. Trent, how did you get involved in this?
Actually, it was 2.5 years ago, Lindsay. I ranch in central Nebraska, and in typical cowboy farmer fashion, I'm sixth generation. I got to one-up the guy in front of me. In this case, in Jared's case, I'm gonna two-up it. My family's been taking care of land and livestock in the United States since 1832. And I'm very fortunate that I found the woman of my dreams, because I've been on the road trying to rally the troops and find true champions like Jared Bosley and network us together so that we can come at this with the truth in a group of people who want to stand up for property rights. And we've lost sight of the fact that property rights equals liberty. I've been very fortunate in the past 23 years to speak in 48 states in the United States and on 4 continents. And every time I leave the North American continent, I go to Japan or I go to Australia, as I've done 5 different times, they always marvel at what we're able to accomplish in the United States. And it comes back to our founding fathers. And this document that I carry in my pocket all the time, frankly, the United States Constitution, which was modeled after the Bible, really comes back to giving individuals the ability to own property so that we can improve the property and improve human life. And that's really at the core of what's being evaded.
Did we lose everything?
He'll come back. Hopefully.
Yeah, he will. He likes to talk.
He's probably still talking.
There's no doubt about it.
All right, well, then I'll just go ahead and ask you this question until he comes back. How close are these pipelines to your house?
From my house, they're probably 1,000 feet is where the pipeline would be, but it's right probably 500 feet from like all my cow lots and my feed lot and my calving barn. And like I told you before, we got future plans to expand the cow herd, and we got trees planted north of the farm and kind of set up for different lots for, get the windbreaks growing. So when we got the cattle, we're able to, protect them from the winters and the winds up here. And they want to come right through it and take that stuff out. And I know and how they got rode in some of their easements that they're coming on, and they've really pulled one over on a lot of people. They go after some of the elderly people and people that aren't maybe, landowners are a lot farther away than the people that actually live here. And they target them, first and get them on. Well, these easements, if you end up having them go on, you can't build or plant a tree within 1,000 feet of this pipeline, but they can come 500 feet from your farm site and predict your entire future. No one knows if you want more grain bins or barns. I mean, we talked about putting a hoop barn up for cattle here, and they just get to predict our entire future. I've put my whole life into this place, and my kids have too. And, every dad's dream would be to have the kids come back and farm right beside them and take over the kind of the legacy that my grandparents and stuff and my dad carried on, and they owe it to that all the past generations and the future generations to fight and stop this. Because if they happen to make this happen, it's going to be it's going to just open a can of, there's more of these things to come, just a whole can of not good for South Dakota. And we just can't get our governor to stand up with us on this deal. She ran on property rights, private property rights. She ran on them and says she stands with the farmer and the rancher and the landowners. But she will not do anything to try to help prevent this. But we also heard that she's kind of got her hands in this money pot also. And if you can, just another politician that sets the rules up to line their pockets, and they don't really care about what's happening to kind of rural America and us out here.
let me ask you, what happens if one of these pipelines burst?
Well, death. Death would happen for sure. So this stuff is it'd be compressed down to it's about 2,300 pounds of pressure. And when this stuff bursts, it'll go through back from the supercritical state back into a gas. And it'll be like when it breaks, it's more or less like dry ice. It'll freeze everything. And then as it expands again, there'll be this big plume cloud. And if anything is in that plume cloud, it will absolutely kill it because it takes away all the oxygen out of the air. So first responders, they can't even come in here. You can't drive a vehicle in here because there's no oxygen to run an internal combustion motor. So, and there's just no possible way that everybody's going to have an SCV just ready and be able to walk out the, 1,500 feet to a half mile or even farther. It just depends on certain weather stuff when this goes. I mean, like this pipeline behind my house is 24 inches wide. It's a 24-inch pipe, 2,300 pounds of pressure with 21-mile check valves. Well, if it breaks, that plume cloud could be 10 miles wide, especially if it's cold. If it's below 32 degrees, it takes forever for this stuff to get back into the air. I mean, if it breaks in January and we're just at zero, this cloud could just move wherever until it disperses, and it will kill everything in its path. And it's all back to Green New Deal things, that everything this Green New Deal tries to do actually hurts the environment so much more than what they ever try to lead on. They put this as a carbon dioxide issue, like it's heating up the air. Well, for one, carbon dioxide will be like dry ice. If anything, it'll cool the air. And right now in the air, we're at about 0.03% carbon dioxide. Well, at 0.02, that's when plant life starts to die. Well, I feel like we're floating close enough to the death line as it is that we don't need to be taking any more of this out. And the whole goal of this pipeline is to get a monopoly on that CO2. The CO2 coming out of these stacks on these ethanol plants is 98% pure. That's like the holy grail for these guys to capture that and make methanol. And methanol is the 5th largest traded commodity in the world. I know Cargill's already using it to power barges. They got 179 barges switched over to run on methanol and 20 new ones ordered. So these guys' whole goal is nothing. It's not saving the planet, nothing like that. It's just strictly to get their hands on all this carbon dioxide, and they're trying to run family farms off the map. And I even feel they're trying to get the farmer-owned ethanol plants into their possession also. There's always more of a motive to all their plans than really helping the nation, and it's hard for us to believe up here that anybody could just be that ruthless and think just that poorly of us and South Dakota and the environment. And it's not just South Dakota, it's North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota. They just want to keep putting these pipelines all over. And they don't really want to run them like, they're not running them like along right-of-ways or anything like that. I mean, they're coming kitty corner across quarters of ground and cutting stuff right down the middle of this. And it's just it's a very frustrating deal. I mean, as we sit here, none of this makes any sense. To all of us that have common sense, it's crazy that this is even thought about. But it's definitely happening and getting more real all the time.
It is crazy. Well, I don't know if you're a believer, but I am. And so this reminds me of a David and Goliath type of situation.
It's been referred to that a lot of different times. And we were taking on a giant. And we know how that David ends up winning that. And we are gaining more family. The army is growing. And we're getting more people informed about this all the time. It's not just landowners' rights, it's property. I mean, that's if someone owns a house in town or anything. They're just going to keep taking stuff, and you're going to get your notice, and they'll give you whatever your house is worth or try to get close to that, and you're just out and done. And it's not That's not how America was, how stuff was founded by our founding fathers. I mean, we got to get back to the Constitution, or this world is going to go in a bad direction for all of us, and especially the next generation.
Mm-hmm. I agree. For people listening and watching this, how can they support you?
We got a webpage, SouthDakotaPropertyRights.com. We got a place on there. We're kind of redoing the website currently, but in a day or so it should be up and running again. And there's a donation button there. People can help donate. We're trying, like Trent said, we're trying to network now everything together. We got a bunch of signs and stuff across the state, and we just to show that our army is gaining, because we've been called 15 radical farmers all over the nation. It's not just that. I mean, it's not well thought of anywhere. The commercials and stuff make it sound a lot better than it is, but it's not that. Those guys just lie about everything possible. They won't prove nothing. And the one thing they won't do is show us the plume study, because they know how bad this is, and it should not be running next. It shouldn't be running next to anybody's house, farm, anything, let alone right next to these towns where there's hospitals and schools and nursing homes and things like that. I mean, you could wipe a whole town out if it breaks and is in the wrong wind or the wrong atmospheric stuff. I mean, it's not in no pipeline. It's never going to break. It's a matter of when it breaks. And I just hope it's not, just no one needs to have to worry about that. We'll put it that way. But no, any donation of that stuff would be very much helpful, because it does cost a lot of money to do this stuff and get some radio ads out there and get the signs made and billboards and things like that. And that's something we gotta try to fight this fight. We have our PUC hearing next month in September, and they're going to decide whether or not they grant them the permit or not. Hopefully it goes right there and we can get them to deny it, which they won't just go away, but that gives us time to get some eminent domain laws switched in legislation. That's the main goal of everything, is to get that done, so these foreign-owned private companies can't come in and eminent domain land for their own private gain. This has nothing to do with any public use by any means. It's not water. It's not oil. I mean, it's not natural gas. It's just they're just coming and taking our stuff, and it's only going to benefit them at all. There's no reason to be burying plant food.
Mm-hmm. I see that Trent's back. Trent, before we lost you, you were telling us about how you got involved.
Yeah, sorry about that. Usually I blame some internet connection, but it simply was my phone got too hot. So we're back on the path. But I've got many friends in agriculture, because I've been in this communicating the benefits and the essentialness of agriculture as a means of national security. And I should say agriculture as in food and energy for the past nearly quarter of a century, 23 years. And a dear friend of mine who's been in the ethanol business his entire life, 2.5 years ago, we were at a conference together, and he said, "Trent, you're not going to believe what we're going to start doing with our ethanol plants." I said, "What's that?" He said, "We're going to put CO2 in a pipeline and send it to be buried." And I'm like, "Well, that's stupid. Why would you do that?" He said, "It makes no sense whatsoever, but they're going to pay us a lot of money, so we're going to have to do it." And that was what the impetus behind me starting to look into what was really going on with this. And I just came back as Jared was walking through that fifth grade science, that every fifth grader can tell you that CO2 is vital. It's not just something we tolerate in the atmosphere. It's vital. And that speaks to the big lie that has taken place. And that is that all greenhouse gases are responsible for plant food. Nitrous oxide is represented in the atmosphere at 78%. That is responsible for producing nitrogen, which feeds plants. Methane is not as nearly significant in the atmosphere, but yet it's been demonized. Methane is 90% of what we call natural gas. And natural gas is used to produce a synthetic fertilizer that feeds plants. And CO2, the third of the most potent greenhouse gases that we're supposed to be sequestering and burying in Earth, is ultimately responsible for feeding plants, fueling the photosynthesis to be exact, which encourages plant growth. It also allows us to have bigger, stronger plants with less water. That gets left out of the equation. And then it, through the conversion of photosynthesis, produces oxygen, which we all need. So if you look in the big picture, and this is why I got involved in this process at the level that I am. Number one, because of the property rights, which I talked about earlier. Property rights are fundamental to individual liberty. Number two, this is not just an issue that's going to affect people like Jared Bosley who happen to own land where this pipeline is going to go through. We are currently at the lowest critical amount of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere. God put CO2 in the atmosphere to feed the plants. It is documented, very well documented, that CO2 at lower than 400 parts per million is going to create a problem with plant growth. We're currently at 430 parts per million, and now we're talking about burying it because there's some climate crisis coming. Well, it has nothing to do with CO2. The other fraud that is brought upon us is that CO2 is holding the heat on Earth and causing us to have global warming. The data doesn't even back up what they're telling us is happening in 2023 when it comes to the Earth warming. More importantly, CO2 is a cooling molecule. It will hold heat for less than 1/1000th of a second. In fact, one of the great properties of CO2 is you take CO2 and you can make dry ice, which will keep anything frozen. And we have soda cans that are using CO2. And here's the real story. And we're just going to cut to the chase because at the end of the day, here's the real problem. We have a few companies who are attempting to use eminent domain, who have perpetuated a lie to monopolize a tremendously valuable molecule called CO2. You can look, the United States Air Force since last fall has been using CO2 to make jet fuel. There are 2 plants in the United States that are proposed to be built. One of them just down the road from Jared Bosley in Lake Preston, South Dakota, to take CO2 and ultimately make jet fuel. We are allowing government entities to use eminent domain to violate property rights, the founding principle of this country, and to monopolize a key component that holds the future of our nation and planet health. And that's why I stand in opposition against this and why I stand with landowners from Louisiana, Texas to Illinois, all the way to North Dakota and beyond. We must unite and stand against this monopoly.
Let me ask you this. Who do you believe is behind this, the Republicans or the Democrats or both?
I'm glad you asked me that question because the answer is both. Jared, originally, he actually alluded to the 45Q tax credit, which was the basis for all of this happening. That was signed by George W. Bush in 2008. In December of 2020, the Use It Act, which was championed by Donald Trump, was signed, which allowed the Use It Act was the 45Q tax credits were there. The Use It Act gave permission to use the 45Q tax credits to the CO2 pipeline. And that was for $50 per metric ton of CO2 that is buried. And then we all know about the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually took the payment from $50 a ton to bury CO2 to $85 a ton, which was the game changer. That's what made everybody now want to be a part of this windfall. Because this is like going to Las Vegas and winning the lottery if you can get $85 per ton, per metric ton, for burying CO2. So the answer to your question is it's not a partisan issue whatsoever. Both Democrats and Republicans have been involved in creating this debacle.
Mm-hmm. Is Kristi Noem involved?
Kristi Noem is greatly involved. In fact, I mentioned the Lake Preston plant that was involved in taking CO2 to make jet fuel. Her son-in-law is actually working with that plant. He has a personal tie. Kristi Noem owns part of an ethanol plant in Granite Falls, Minnesota, which is receiving a contract from Summit Carbon Solutions to be a part of this. 2 of her largest contributors in her last inaugural ball were Summit Carbon Solutions and Navigator CO2 pipelines. It's pretty clear that there is a direct tie. More importantly, and Jared could speak to this firsthand, because she campaigned in her last gubernatorial race, her number one priority was to stand up for property rights. And you have a guy here who looked her in the eye 1 year ago this month and said, Kristi, What are you going to do for standing up for my property rights? Because this CO2 pipeline, they're threatening eminent domain. That's a direct violation of my property rights. And Jared Bosley, what did she tell you?
Her first answer was, it's out of my hands. It's in the PUC control. I can't do nothing about this. And my next statement was, well, you're the most powerful elected official in the state. I feel you can do something about this. She looked right at me and said, am I supposed to fight all your battles for you? And that was said. There was, 15 to 20 of us standing around there. We just got out of a forum for this pipeline deal, and she was actually speaking next. I got pictures of that. Like, that absolutely happened. And after the farm invasion with the drill rigs here, she actually took property rights off of her webpage. So she ran out of property rights, and then 2 years later just decided we'll just erase that. We don't need to stand by that now. I mean, she's got commercials out there from her dad saying, Christy, don't sell the land, because they're not making it anymore. So I guess it's don't sell the Nome land, but let's go take the Bosley land. And it's just hard to believe it's even happening, and we don't get any help from up top on anything about this.
And I want to add to that, because in the past legislative session, Kristi Noem as governor was making a lot of noise, got a lot of national attention for standing up. Want to make sure that China does not purchase South Dakota farmland. Well, here's what's taking place. You take Jared Bosley, for example, and the other 100 landowners that do not want to be a part of this pipeline, and yet eminent domain papers have said you're going to be a part of this pipeline. They have to sign an easement. So the folks who own this property sign an easement to give property rights away to the owner of the easement. That means that Jared Bosley pays a mortgage. Jared Bosley pays taxes to Brown County every year for owning property. And there's no assurance whatsoever that that easement, will not be sold to a foreign entity. There's no rule, regulation, law that says that that easement can't be sold to China. So you could have a situation where China doesn't own the land. They don't pay the mortgage. They don't pay the property tax, and yet they control 100%. He can't even plant a tree without getting permission. Who doesn't want to plant a tree? That's what's the health of the planet, is the whole thing about more plants equal a healthier planet, equal more people and healthier people. It's about the cycle of life that God created, and we have people like Kristi Noem trying to disrupt that.
Trent, how would you encourage people to get involved? What can they do if they see this and say, I want to help? What would you encourage them to do?
So first of all, our founding fathers told us, the most important government is local government. Make sure you get involved. And I don't care if you're not in one of the states that I've named and mentioned, your property rights are leaving you. We've actually formed the Free Soil Coalition, and you can get more information about everything I talked about. You can see other interviews with Jared and other landowners at freesoilcoalition.com. If you know the history of the Free Soil Party, they were standing up to the tyranny of the federal government as early as 1848. And so we've kind of latched on to the concept behind standing up to the government, standing up to this tyranny and erosion of property rights, and getting people information, because the Free Soil Coalition has one mission: to make sure that all of us have access to the information that we know, so that we can empower the citizens of counties and the counties themselves to take a stand and do what they're tasked in doing, and that is protect the citizens of their local county from enemies, foreign and domestic.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Trent, Jared, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for your tolerance in my heat issues. As we talk about, we need more CO2 in the atmosphere to bring about some cooling.
There you go.
Perfect. All right. Well, I appreciate it. I know I've learned a lot. Definitely learned a lot today on CO2 and pipelines. So hoping this can bring some more awareness.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Lindsay.
Bye, guys.